Business is messy and unpredictable.
Sometimes lonely.
So lonely.
So lonely.
And inspiration can often come from really weird places.
We pick up where the bullet point blogs and the highlight reels leave off.
We start with the stories. Welcome back to So Here's My Story. I'm Jody.
I'm Elliot.
And we have a new person to welcome into the Facebook group.
A new international person to welcome.
Another country. I wish we had like a map. We could put a little pin on it or something. But.
Well, the map would really only entertain the two of us unless we did video.
Well, I know. We're on it. We're on it. Actually, we could just, you know what? Because no one can see us, though, we could pretend. Here, Elliot, I'm going to go put a push pin in the map.
Excellent. Nice.
That's supposed to be my push pin sound. Because like push pins make sounds. I don't know. Anyway, wow, we're off to a roaring start.
Focus.
Okay,
laser focus.
Back to Noah. So we want to welcome Noah Rutkowski. I hope I said your name right. I feel like I have to say that every single time. Can't we get like someone whose last name is Smith?
Rutkowski.
Oh, yeah, you're right. Here, you say it.
Rutkowski.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Thank you. So Noah is joining us from London.
Hi, Noah.
So now that makes for Sweden, London, and Brazil, which is not how they say Brazil in Brazil.
And America.
And America. Oh, but no, and Canada.
And Canada.
Well, actually, we're not going to name all 78 countries or whatever.
No, but we were just talking about the podcast community.
Oh, I'm right. I'm sorry. That's right. The podcast community. So yes, then you are correct. All right. Okay, let's hope this is not like foreshadowing the focus of this week's show. So why don't you thank our sponsors? Oh, no, before you do that, I had some second thoughts.
You did?
Yeah, not really a whole second thought, just something that I thought was so poignant. This happens so often. Like we record an episode and then like 2 days later, I see some really just profound quote or some little thing that I was like, oh, I wish I'd had that when we recorded, which is why we created this whole like Second Thoughts.
And this is Second Thoughts on which episode?
The episode we just did on ending things.
Okay.
So here's my second thought. I was watching that show New Girl. I don't know if you've seen that with Zooey Deschanel. It is such a I won't call it a guilty pleasure, but I love that show and it's so mindless, but it's so wonderful and I love the characters and it makes me laugh. And so Nick has been, there was a point where Nick had been dating Megan Fox, whatever her character's name is, for a while, and they needed to break up, but he wasn't dealing with it. So he was in classic Nick, he was sort of avoiding the thing. And this felt so important to me because I think it was kind of part of what I wanted to get at with last week's episode is that I think sometimes we don't put love and care and honor into how we end things because we instead avoid ending things because we think of them as that is a yucky part of something. So he was doing all the classic things when you don't want to break up with someone but you need to break up with someone. And then I think maybe the CC character said something to him. I'm probably botching the quote, but it said something like this. Maybe you're so upset because your relationship with Reagan, I think her name was, your relationship actually meant something to you and you're ending it like it didn't. And that to me just landed with this really profound thud of that's it. If something meant something to you, you owe it the honor of an honorable ending. And to me, that just sort of shifts the whole kind of avoidance and anxiousness of it into something that like, how do I want to see this through all the way to the end? I think, as you said, like pushing through past the board if you're going to break it.
Yeah, but I think that one of the issues, and we don't need to rehash the episode, but I think that's such an important point because in order to end something with giving it the honor of the significance it occupied in your life, you have to look at it when the temptation is to just look past it and forward.
Run away.
It's not just, part of it is run away, but part of it is also like, nothing to see here. Everything's fine. I'm moving on. Everything's, it's okay. That was a big thing, but you know what? I'm over it now.
Yeah. No, exactly.
So
we could do a whole other, absolutely. And I think that's why the word honor comes up because it requires that you dig a little deeper. Say like, my instinct right now is a little bit fight or flight. I want to just I want to not acknowledge that thing, but I have to turn it around, look it in the eye and give it the respect it deserves.
Right.
So, all right. So moving on. So if you thank our sponsors, and then we'll get on to my story. As
always, would like to thank Tom Loveland at Mind Over Machines, Cat's Copy, the architecture firm of GWWO, and Marycraft Staffing and HR Solutions. Thank you so much.
And I'm going to jump right in with my story.
Please do.
So here's my story. This is both about something that's happening tonight, but then it's been building toward this for quite a while, including this past weekend. So I don't know how much I've talked about this on the show, but I sing in a band, as you know. And you are aware. You've come to see us.
I've seen you.
And we're playing a gig out tonight. And I just sing. Like there are other musicians in the band. I do play the tambourine, but I don't really. Actually, I play two tambourines at the same time. Yes. I'm a master tambouriner. Yes. But I have been aspiring to learn to play guitar for many, many years, and I am substantially, impressively bad at it, have been for quite a while. I just could not. You shake your head. Yes. You're like, yes, you are.
I haven't.
You haven't actually seen
that. Was an empathy shake. That was not a, yes, thank God you finally had the insight to recognize.
No, it has been really, really, really hard for me to learn. And I don't know why, but it's just no matter how much I practiced, I couldn't get the muscle memory. I couldn't. And it was also for some reason, a really vulnerable thing for me. I had a hard time. And if you don't play out with other people, it's really hard to get good at it because you can always stop yourself and take 35 seconds to find the next chord. And you really have to be playing with other people. Anyway, I just sort of rewind a tiny bit. This past weekend, one of my favorite times of the year, 2 folks from my band and then 3 or 4 folks from another band. Actually, one of them sort of independent, but there's 7 of us that go away once a year for band music weekend. And it's 3 or 4 days. And we rent a house somewhere. We play music like 20 hours a day and eat and drink. And it's like the best time ever. And I, for the first time ever, brought my guitar. And I played for days and days and days. And so therefore, tonight at my gig, I'm playing out for the very first time ever, which is not nerve-wracking at all. I'm like literally like fiddling with my purse as I'm talking right now. I'm like, oh, we're playing out. But here's the part that this weekend made me think I want to do an episode on this. And that is the very specific things that have transpired that have allowed me to get to that point. And there's such a profound leadership story in this, I think. So it's really interesting to me. I've been around a lot of people as I've been trying to learn who are very accepting. They don't mock me when I try and play. They're very encouraging. They say, bring your guitar anytime. Or do you want to they leave the door wide open. So there's no obstruction. And I think.
So you're not playing in front of my family.
Just to clarify. Just bear with me. This will all make sense in a minute, okay. I promise. But that wasn't enough. And so really tie this into leadership here in a second. But I think a lot of times I know when I'm trying to lead or guide people, I think it feels like you've done everything you could possibly do. Like, well, I told them, if you want to take over that thing, go ahead. And then you're frustrated that they don't. Or I myself have felt that way. And so it's just been interesting to watch my progress where there were all these people sort of opening the door wide open for me, not putting anything in my way. And usually that's more than enough for me. Like I'll jump into any new thing without thinking about it. That's not usually something that was daunting for me, but something about this, it was. And in this case, I needed something else or something more to facilitate me growing into a new stretch of something. And that came from John Lee, who's in my band, who more than just doesn't get in my way. He actively, proactively helped create a path for me. So we'd be playing. He was like, "Oh, hey, why don't you get out your guitar?" Or, "Hey, this is a song you could play. This is another CDG song that or hey, how about you try this? Like this is another song you could play." And he nudged me. He created, and he did it just enough that all of a sudden I got over that hump. And it was so important. And I can personally just say I wouldn't have gotten to this point where I'm playing tonight if someone hadn't more than just given me the opportunity. And because I'm someone who usually only just needs the door like a tiny bit of a crack, and I'm like, oh, I'll go do that thing. I think it's a really important piece because I talk to so many people, and I personally have been so frustrated when I'm like, well, I told that person they could run with that. Why aren't they doing it? And so it just seems like a conversation that comes up in business all the time, in the frustrations of, usually I hear it in terms of like, why aren't my people doing what I want them to do? Or why don't they just, I've told them they're they're empowered to make these decisions? Why aren't they making them? And it's just a place that as a leader, I think you can step back and say, is this an instance? And to be very clear, not saying that you need to babysit people every step of the way, but is this an instance where I need to lay out a little bit more than just an open door?
Well, I think that a lot of times with leadership, you're stuck in what is a column A or column B choice. If you're going to give somebody the opportunity, column A might be, okay, I'll open the door wide. I'll let them have that opportunity. Column B might be, I'm going to throw them in and see if they sink or swim. And I think that there's a middle ground of creating a comfortable space to allow somebody to see how it feels without the pressure of sink or swim, or without the pressure of self-propelling yourself into the that's redundant, but self-propelling into the pool. You don't have to be the one to dive, and you don't necessarily want somebody to push you.
Right.
But you might want a situation where if you decide to jump, the right person is in the right place so that it's not sink or swim.
Yeah. And that's exactly, and it's so interesting because my own sort of like yes, but kind of mind when I was thinking about this on the drive home after band weekend was still trying to be that binary, because I was arguing with myself in my brain. I'm like, yeah, but you shouldn't have to like, people should take things in wrong. You shouldn't have to, help them along every step of the way. And I was like, wait a minute, Jody, I'm not talking about like, if John had to do that with me every single step of the way going forward, trying to not thinking of this as guitar, but like a business thing or something. If he had to keep doing it to make me take every step forward, that would be problematic. That's not sustainable in a leadership way.
Correct.
But this was so interesting to me because this wasn't that. I am someone who will run with something, but there was something going on mentally or emotionally or psychologically. I don't know. There was a hurdle for me to get over, and I needed kind of escorted through that hurdle. And now that I'm to the other side, I'm taking it and running with it. So that's the noticing where there might be a temporary pothole that someone needs some help around, and then they'll run with it, versus sort of like you're saying, this binary kind of, they're just not going to run with it. So
and I also think that it was interesting. You mentioned muscle memory in a literal sense with the guitar, playing the guitar, but I think there's the muscle memory of getting over that threshold of actually knowing, okay, I'm pulling out my guitar now because this is a CDG song, or this is something that I want to try, or this is an environment in which I want to try it. If you have the muscle memory of being in a group and pulling out your guitar, or you have the muscle memory of starting the first couple tentative steps in a new experience or a new direction, I think that's really where the middle ground where you find that middle ground and the ability to stretch, because it's so hard. I don't know. I think because I swam this morning, I'm using the pool analogies, but it's so hard when you're just standing on the side of the pool. But I think if you have the memory of getting your feet wet, if you have the memory of moving forward a little bit, not so that you're underwater and you're panicked, but if you just have the memory of moving forward, you can start something. Well,
I think you just nailed it. I think when you are asking someone to do something that feels incredibly foreign or incredibly vulnerable, or it feels like a big leap for whatever reason, whether it's in a skill base or knowledge base, or just it's new, or it's just scary for some reason. And for me, it was a little bit of all those things. The breaking it down so they're not trying to think of all of it at once. So, for me, there's the chords, there's the whatever it is you're doing with your right hand to strum, which seems like the easy part until you actually figure out a few chords, and then you realize that the right hand part is as hard, if not harder. There's the remembering the words, there's putting it all together, there's the humility of playing in front of other people, which makes you more self-conscious. There's all those different things. And for instance, as he and I talked, because he made it easy, more than easy. Easy is not the right word. He, I'm so grateful to him. I'm trying to think through, what exactly did he do that made me feel more comfortable trying things, which is the only way to get better at something. Right. That's why it's so important. It's not like he just did a nice thing for me. This is if you want to crack the nut of how to get the people who work with you to do bigger and better work, part of that is the humility of untangling what's in their way. And as he and I talked one time, I had this, I started off trying to learn to play songs that I sing, imagining that those would be the first ones I tried to play out. Well, one day, as he and I were talking, I'm like, okay, this is ridiculous. Why am I'm taking all these variables at once. What if I try to learn some of the songs that you sing? Because then I'm not trying to tackle 100% of the variables all at one time. And it's that breaking it down, getting in the pool, doing this thing so that someone can enter into a new space in a way that doesn't feel like they're taking it all on at once, I guess.
Yeah, and I see this so much when you're trying to bring, I'll tie it to age, but it's not necessarily age, but younger people along in a profession or in a job. And particularly if you want them to develop relationships that later become part of business development. And there's either, I'll put it in my language, coming up in law. Well, the partners go out and they do the prospecting and they talk with prospective clients or the actual clients or whatever. And so then the people that you want to bring along don't get a chance to do any of it. And they're worried. They know they have to, but they haven't done anything. And then you go to the other binary choice, which is, okay, now it's time. Why don't you go out, you go meet clients, you go network, you go do this and you go do that. And that's outside a lot of people's comfort zones. And so you've either said there's no opportunity, or you're saying, hey, you can sink or swim. The door's open. You can go and do that. But there's no, often there's not a middle effort to create that muscle memory of starting the conversation or identifying somebody you can talk to or inviting somebody out for coffee, but not having to do all of the things, right. Because just like strumming with your right hand and doing the chords with your left and remembering the words to the song and what are you doing with your body and, right. Where are you positioned? Sometimes even something that, look, I've been doing this for 30 years, so going out to coffee with somebody is not a big thing, but you have to set up the logistics and kind of not sound stupid when you're asking somebody to coffee, which can be intimidating if you haven't done that before. And you want to know what to talk about, which we had said in the episode about the second question, second question zing. You want to know what to talk about without having a script of, so what's the ideal client you're looking for? Or how can I help you? Or do you want to do business with me? So there are all these things you'd have to work on, and it's that middle level, the John Lee level, right. that you were able to experience, where he made it comfortable and pushed you just enough, but was there to create a space for you to explore.
No, that's exactly it, because he didn't just give me all the space in the world. Like he would right. push me. He'd be like, "Go get your guitar." He would push me. But he knew just enough when to not. It wasn't like he turned to me in the middle of the gig and said, right. "Why don't you take this one?" Not or other. I don't know. I haven't played out yet. We'll see if he does that to me tonight. But I don't think he would. But you've this. I'm so glad we're having this conversation, because it's helping me to articulate the thing that feels so important about this. There's two things that came up as you were talking. And right at the moment, I can only remember one of them. So we'll see if the other
Never give a number. There are 9 points I wanted to make. Never give a number.
Oh, dear. But the other one was even more important. Let me see if I can come to it. But one of them is the disproportionate effect of supportiveness as compared to just the tiniest bit of fill in the blank with eye rolling, snark, condescension, judgment, whatever. Right. When you are feeling vulnerable and you can say like, well, people should, we're grownups, you should just buck up. Like you can say that all you want, but the fact of the matter is inside we're all like 6 years old and we don't want to look like idiots. And that is just an inarguable fact. I took my guitar home and was playing with someone else or trying to, trying to find places where I could play more. And I couldn't help but notice there was someone who was there who they were also playing and just like, they didn't say anything overtly horrible, but just made a couple kind of like, oh, nice, yeah, nice try, or something like some tiny little, just joke, something that in other circumstances I would have laughed, because I'm all for the self-deprecating mockery. Like that's, you and I banter that way all the time. But in that situation where I was feeling really shy and embarrassed about how astoundingly bad I can be at guitar, that tiny little bit, like I had to fight the urge to just put my guitar away. And I was like, wow, it's so amazing that in those moments of growth, sometimes you need, this does tie back to my other point. You need an overgrown amount of empathy and space and non-judgment as compared to just like this tiny little bit of snark can be like weed killer. And then you're like, I'm out. But I think that was the other point is I think sometimes when we are good at something, which if you're leading, you're probably hoping to pass on the things that you do well. You're wishing other people could do. I hear that line all the time. Like, I need more me's on this team. I need people who can do what I do. Well, if you want people to be able to do the thing that you're really good at, you have to be able to reach back to the beginning and have some empathy for how it felt when you started that thing. And I think we lose empathy for how things used to feel as you get better and better at them.
I think that's one of the primary problems. You don't remember when it was difficult.
Yeah.
And so that's where I think the conversation comes in, because you can't just look at the end. I mean, well, I think it's destructive to just look at the end. I want you to be really good at business development without creating an environment where you can have a candid, non-judgmental conversation with the person and saying, let's go through this. Tell me what you would look forward to or what scares the bejesus out of you. But you see, the difficult thing in many situations, if you're a young person starting out, or if you're in a new job, doesn't matter what age or how long you've been in the industry, if you're starting something new, we have a culture where you're not allowed to say that something makes you nervous. Our culture is, I got it. I got it. And the I got it culture, I think, is really ultimately an obstacle in the way of growth.
Hell yes. Absolutely. It's certainly an obstacle in the way of getting, of untangling what's in the way of moving forward, which therefore limits growth. Like there was another guy there this weekend, Russ. Great guy, spent more than a few times, came over and said like, oh, here's a different way to play C. If you're going to be over, if you're going to be doing these things over there, you can also play here. It's not quite the same chord, but it's close enough. And it's a heck of a lot easier if you're trying to go back and forth. And, he came up with, but then there was this one time where I'd asked him how you make this sort of like chunk. It's like, chunk, chunk, chunk. It's just a different way it's a different sound that's coming out. I was like, what's happening there? And it was one of those moments. He was like, oh, it's really, you're just, you're doing it with both hands. Really. You just kind of, and he just kept doing, he did it like 3 or 4 times. He's like, you just do that. I'm like, I don't know but what is that? Because from this side of the guitar, I couldn't even see what he was like. Well, you just do this. And he did it again. I'm like, yeah, okay, that's great, Russ. I can't see what's happening. And it was very laughable. But, and I finally, then he did break it down a little bit more. And I was like, oh, okay. But I fundamentally, because that's the other sort of gap sometimes. It was so easy for him. He's like, you just do this. But I'm so far back on the learning curve. I couldn't even, it's almost like our words like we had an episode a few times ago about words that you don't have the vocabulary for something. It makes it harder to bridge that gap. This is like is on the visual side of that. Like I don't even know what I'm watching for to know what he's doing differently with his fingers.
And often that's a matter of somebody who wants to teach. I'm not saying that Russ is that way, but wants to teach, but doesn't know how, because not everybody can do that. And it reminds me of, there's a scene in Good Will Hunting with Matt Damon and Minnie Driver. And so Matt Damon is sitting there. They're someplace on the Harvard campus, and Minnie Driver has this work to do. And Matt Damon says, well, it's easy. You just do whatever. And he rattles something off. And she says, how do you do that? I don't understand how you do that. And what he says is, think about a piano. He says, now there are people that can play piano, but to me, a piano is a wooden box and chords and felt hammers and ivory and all that stuff. I know how it's put together, but I don't know how to make the music. But when it comes to this, and he was her course of study, organic chemistry or whatever, he said, when it comes to this, I just play. So he couldn't explain to her how he was doing it, because for him, he could just play. And there are those people, and they're great people, and they're wonderful, and they can propel an organization, but they can't propel a learning experience.
Yeah, exactly. I had a client one time who was just one of these. It's funny you mentioned Good Will Hunting. I mean, she was almost that way about her area, which was like strategic communications for large scale, complex organizations. And she could I mean, it's almost like her version of that, just sort of plowing through the formulas on the chalkboard, kind of like she would look at something and she could instantly scan and be like, okay, we need to do this, this, and this. And she was perpetually frustrated that her team couldn't see these patterns. They couldn't see what she saw. And we spent a lot of time talking about how she had to find ways to, and sort of metaphor, I don't know if it's actually even a metaphor, we came up with was if you could watch the movie that goes on in your head in slow motion, you don't need to narrate every tiny piece of it for them, but if you want to bring them along with you and grow that muscle memory in them, you have to find, and it may not even be frame by frame, even if you could get 1 out of every 100 frames along the way and come up with just even the most basic framework. Well, first I scan big, then I just give them some kind of line of sight to how you're thinking, but it means slowing it down, thinking it through. Okay, what are the key, what is what I do? Because for her, it was just so I just play. Doesn't everybody see that? No, they don't. And to me, there's this, whether it's frustrating or not, whatever shoulds you want to come up with, the fact of the matter is you can either choose to be frustrated by it, or you can choose to acknowledge the fact that when someone doesn't see things the way you do, they need help seeing things the way you do, and slow it down. And perfect example of this, and it's probably why I one of the reasons I didn't go straight into grad school for psychology was I got frustrated with some of the research. Anyway, I digress here a tiny bit, but I was working at the NIH in a psychological research lab, helping with this giant longitudinal study. And I was working for someone who was doing this attention span testing. And I had the scintillating task of watching people from behind a two-way mirror as they did this hour-long attention span test on a computer. And I was supposed to write down every 5 minutes whether they were, still doing the test, or they were sleeping, or if they leaned back, or I was just supposed to take all of the documented notes of what they were doing in the test. So at some point along the way, there was this older woman in her 80s who was there to take the test. I can't be certain of this, but I'm reasonably certain, especially since this was back in 1995, that she had never used a computer. Never. And this was on a computer. And we were asking them the commands you had to use weren't even it's not like it was literally we weren't using the up and down buttons that at least are labeled up and down. It was well, if you want to answer this, press D. And if you want to answer that, press L. We're using the middle keys that weren't even that obvious. So her test results came back super random. And the guy, I know this is a long story, but there's a really good point here. The gentleman that I was working for, who was the scientist who was running this study, wanted to find a reason. He's well, maybe she thought this key was this key, or maybe she thought this key was this key, but there was no pattern to it. And I kept suggesting, I said, honestly, I think that she was just embarrassed because she had to have me come back in 4 times to explain it to her again. And that was in the first 10 minutes. And I think there just came the point, this seems like the most logical answer to me, she was embarrassed. And she didn't want to look like an idiot again and have me come back again. So I think she just started hitting random keys to get it done with as quickly as possible so that she could get out of it. And fascinatingly, he would not accept that as an answer. He kept trying to find a pattern in the data of what had gone wrong. And I thought, wow, you're trying to study human nature, human ability, human skill sets, and you're overlooking one of the most fundamental things, which is we don't want to look like idiots.
Yeah. I mean, what is it? Occam's razor?
Yeah.
Sometimes the most straightforward and simplest explanation is the right one.
Yeah. In medicine, they say if you hear hoofbeats, think horses, not zebras.
Right. Right. And so I think as we wrap this up, what I'm really hearing, when you bring it back to business, when you talk about training somebody, getting them out of their comfort zone, taking the next step in whatever path they see for themselves or you see for them, if as a leader you're thinking, they can't do that, or I wish they could do that. What I'm hearing from the stories really is that sometimes as a leader, you have to realize that frustration is a choice. And
frustration with them is a choice.
Yes, frustration with them is a choice because you have other options.
And I think we've said this one other time, just one thought. Never do I say this in even the remotely patronizing way. I think if you think of them as a child, not in a pat them on the head like, oh, you're a child, but in a kindness and empathy kind of way of How would you teach a child to play guitar? Would you just, would you just be like, well, just do it? Why aren't you just doing it? Like you would break it down. You would be empathetic. You would recognize when they were feeling embarrassed or frustrated. And I think there's something to that.
And urge them along a little bit.
Yeah. Give them a cookie.
So that's our story.
But the discussion doesn't have to end here.
No, it does not.
In fact, we don't want it to.
No, we don't.
That is why we actually have our private Facebook group,
which we started to make sure that we could get your comments, your rants, your thoughts,
your stories.
Your stories.
You can find links to that group as well as show notes and links to subscribe via email and how to find us just about anywhere you can possibly find podcasts at sohere'smystory.com.
And you can also find us on Facebook and Twitter at SHMS Podcast.
And since we know it takes a village.
Yes, it does.
We'd like to thank our village, our super talented, incredibly patient team.
And occasionally snarky team.
Yeah, but in the best of ways.
In the best of ways.
Snarky.
Yes.
Good mockery.
So a huge shout out to the people who actually help us produce our show. First, our sound engineer, Tom Hansen.
Thanks to Christy Schmier for our brilliant show notes and all the other fantastic writing she does for us.
And to Taylor Mathauer for doing just a little bit of everything.
Including wrangling us.
Which
is no small feat.
No, it's not.
This is Jody Hume.
And I'm Elliot Wagenheim.
And you've been listening to So Here's My Story.